Hello, and welcome back to Many Adventures Mini. This week I am continuing along with the Warmachine Infernals faction that was released at the beginning of August. This time I am moving on more towards their horrors, which are their big monstrous creatures that they bring into the battles with them. The one I'm working on specifically this week is called a Lamenter. It's kind of a flying monstrosity with giant scything hands, so you'll see it in a minute, but it's kind of cool and terrifying. So my goal with this paint job is I was playing around a little bit and trying to find an easily repeatable and quickly done tabletop standard that would let me get the basic look that I was going for, but again be quick and repeatable so I could potentially throw this onto a bunch of different miniatures going forward and have basically the same result. I think I managed to do that pretty successfully, so let's go ahead and show you how I did it. Alright, so here's our pre-images for this Lamenter. Like I said, it's kind of almost bug-like, large, almost Primantis-like scything hands going on, and in general, a terrifying monster, but a nice base, so we'll go ahead and jump in here. I'm starting off with this mummy robes through my airbrush just to give everything a nice bright color on top of my primer color here. I didn't want to stick with just the primer color for multiple reasons, so I do that as my base color. And then I go ahead and pull out this Citadel Contrast Technical medium and mix it a little bit with my ash gray paint, which gives it a little bit of the properties of the contrast paint in that it helps it settle into the cracks and leave the highlighted area, the raised areas as kind of a highlight. So I take advantage of that to make almost kind of like a pale gray wash with more of the contrast consistency. And I continue on with more contrast paint here on the talons. I guess I'm going to stick with talons for now. I paint them up halfway and then mix more medium into some of this black here in order to try and get like a transition effect, because I'm trying to see if I can get kind of like an interesting blend effect to go from the pale to the dark. I had some additional plans for this that I ended up scrapping, but it was an interesting technique and I might use it again in the future, but in this particular instance I didn't like it, so I just ended up going back and filling it all in with black. But then I use my pure red to start filling in some of my gaps here with a little bit of my mummy robes on the side so that I can touch anything up on the highlights if I get red where I don't want it. But I just going in and picking out these specific spots and just filling in their kind of crevices in the sculpt. So I'm basically just filling them in with this red. And just taking my time and trying to do it as carefully as possible. I do have the white for some correction, but I prefer to avoid using it as much as possible since it can interfere with the contrast ash gray wash that I had done before, which did exactly what I wanted it to, by the way. It's given me some nice pale shadows, allowing me to have this very white skin tone that I haven't been able to pull off very easily before. And it looks great in my opinion. Way better than if I had tried to use like a thinned down black wash or something. So I'm pretty satisfied with that and happy with how it turned out. But this is the most fiddly part overall, is just filling in all these gaps. And then I also use this Warlock Purple just to get the tongue. It helps it stand out. And I am basing this paint job off of the studio artwork from the studio. It's a type of paint scheme that I'm not particularly familiar with, so I decided to tackle it as a bit of a challenge to myself to see if I could replicate it and whatnot. I'm not doing it exactly the same. There are some slight tweaks that I'm doing it towards more of my personal style, but the overall theme is similar to what the original studio paint jobs were like that the company did. I've also got these crevices in the claws here, talons. I'm never going to get that straight. And I just fill those in. Basically, this is just its infernal glow, showing its internal soul power from the souls it's devoured, keeping its form in reality, I suppose. It goes into the lore of the creatures, but I do like how the red looks in these crevices. It's pretty nice. This is fairly thinned down pure red paint. It's not quite like a wash or anything, it's just very thin so that it stays in the cracks very easily. And then I also take some bone for some of these smaller spikes. For all the large bits, like the talons and the spines going down the back, I used the black contrast paint. And here I was actually cleaning up some stray threads or something like that that I hadn't noticed when I was first working on it, so I was just doing a little bit of cleanup with that. But where was I? Yes, so I used the black contrast paint on the large talons and the spines along the back, and then for the less prominent areas I am using the bone color. And here I'm just doing my usual process for the ground, using my dark stone to paint in the rocks as thoroughly as possible. And that's nothing different from what I usually do. I'm just going around being careful with it, but this is definitely like a surprisingly simple and easy to do paint job. I was really surprised with how simple it was. It's definitely a very repeatable process, and without all of the testing, I could probably get this done in half the time it took me to do it this time if I needed to paint a couple more of these to the same standard. Which, this isn't the highest standard I could paint it to. I could definitely spend 4 or 5 times the amount of time I spent on this to get a much richer effect. But this is a tabletop standard. I want it to look as nice as I can, but I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. Which is why I went with the gray pseudo wash that I made with the contrast medium. It gave me a lot of good definition and effect without bringing the color down, and didn't have me doing several layers of different thinned down paints that would have taken me 10 hours of total paint time to make look right. And after I get a bunch of that all settled down, I take my uniform gray and do some dry brushing on the ground. This is again right in line with my usual step, and I'm also using my bone color on top of that, like I found last time I really liked the look of. And I'm also throwing just a little bit of a black wash on there to get the effect I'm looking for. And then again, I'm doing this quick thing with the front and back arcs, painting the front half of the base red and the back half of the base black. The black just because it looks nice, and the red on the front just to differentiate the front half of the base, since it does have meaning in the game's rule set, and it's very useful to know. Then I use my usual burnt umber wash, and here I'm just being very careful to just put the absolute minimum amount of wash possible, because I do not want it pooling very much. I just want it just barely staining that bone color to make it look a little bit more realistic. But I'm being very, very careful to have as little of it on there as possible, and just enough to stain it, and if I get any excess, I quickly try and soak it up with the brush tip to get it off as much as possible. And I also take a little bit of an indigo wash to put on the tongue, since I wanted a little bit on there, but I didn't want it to be too overpowering. And that's more or less it. Then you just take my Vallejo matte varnish and coat everything. And here's the final images. It looks amazing in these pictures. I really like the way it turned out. It's definitely a repeatable one, and I'm going to be applying this to the rest of the horrors that I come across. And I really hope that this came over well and you got to see what you wanted out of it. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I do think I managed to achieve what I set out for at the beginning with this particular project, and I'm satisfied with that, and I'm going to keep trying to apply this basic technique that I came up with to the majority of the monster-like creatures in this army. I'll have to see whether I keep doing videos on these as we keep going forward, or pick out some of the other ones from the army that are different for everything. But as usual, if you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up. It helps out a lot. If you have any comments for me, there's the comment section down below. I love to get any feedback that I can. And if you want to see any of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button and just hit the bell icon so that it will notify you whenever any of my videos go up. So, without further ado, I hope to see you all again next week.